happening? Yes, it is. I'm live. It's the Nazarite bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. Heads up, I'm doing a bit of babysitting here. The toddler is asleep, but I need to go, which is why also it's a hang. I may disappear for a moment, I may not, who knows. So, hello. It's the 15th of Av, the full moon, and hey, hello, Timangwa. How you doing? Good to see you. How are you? Do tell. As I mentioned earlier, in the week, the 15th of Av is a very special day. It's said that there were no good days for Israel quite as the holiday of atonement, Yom Kippur, and the 15th of Av, Tetvav Be'av. That's tonight, that full moon of Av in summer, where the three main things, and maybe other things that I don't recall, happened on this night. One of them is that the different tribes were allowed to intermarry. Another one is that the people who were commanded to die out during the time of the spies in the desert, all of those folk, all of that generation died out. And on Tetvav Be'av, those who were living on the 40th year were already living and entering the land. I mean, in the future. And they found that out on the 15th of Av. And the when the revolt against Rome was going on, or is it before the destruction? I think it's after the destruction. After the destruction of the Second Temple, if I'm not mistaken, it was after, but around the time when Rome was in the area, there was a kind of place of refuge or a city of refuge, not an actual biblical one, called Beital. And well, there was a story there. It's quite tragic, but the point is that on this day, the 15th of Av, the people of Beital, who were all dead, were brought to a proper burial. Those are the three things that, off the top of my mind, have to do with the 15th of Av, and it was known as a day when the women of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and perhaps all of Israel, would go out. The single women would go out dressed in white, and they would dance in the vineyards, and it would be a day of of love and of coming together, of making covenants of marriage, and again, a very special day. Now, people sometimes equate it with, let's say, the Christian Saint Valentine's Day, and I suppose it does have a lot to do with love, and that's certainly that the angle that some people, right, something that they attribute to this day, because it does have to do with unions and with marriage and with things coming together. And I, 3 years ago on this day, went through one of the most amazing mushroom trips of my life in Amsterdam, alone in silent darkness, doing my own hero dose. I don't think that video survived. I don't think it did, but it was a good time. So I'm going to read a few comments. I'll read the chat here, and then I'll read a few comments from the last couple of days, and one that I only saw now that's 3 months old that I would like to address. So Tim Angwa said, "I'm good. Do you have a cough bringing you down?" So yeah, I've had a mild cough, mild but persistent, ever since about April, right? About the holiday of Passover, I got COVID, and the cough has been lingering, and I am not doing enough about it. I'll be the first to admit it, say it out loud. I'm not doing enough to get rid of this cough, not with mainstream medicine, nor with any kind of Eastern or alternative medicine or homeopathy and things of that nature. I haven't, and I ought to. Good morning from Oregon. Hello, Karen. Good morning to you. Good morning. Angel's Life says, I am not good. My in laws are trying to break up my marriage. Oh my God. That's tough. I mean, you tell me, Angel. Angel's Life. What is their claim? If you don't mind me asking, what are they saying? What is it? Why should the marriage break up according to them? Or are they trying to do it without actually claiming that they're doing it? A kind of indirect manipulation of the marriage, trying to come between you guys? Do let me know. I'm curious. Ki ata levadcha kadosh. For you alone are holy. That's right. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh. That's right. Shalom achi, they say they love you on the Christian channel. Well, love might be a strong word, but yes, I was so happy to do that interview yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yes, yesterday. No, 2 days ago. Whatever it was. I think it was yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. So hey, I love doing it, and Some would say I love hearing myself talk. Maybe that's why I do this. But I certainly enjoy speaking and becoming more educated and enlightened. It's it's a very grand thing, and I don't take it for granted to be able to communicate this way, to have you here now. Angel's Life says, saying I am not a good person because some of my mom's family is from Israel. That's hardly a claim to level against you that you're not a good person because some of your mother's family is in Israel. Are they aware that you and your mom's family are different people? As the TikTok guy goes, right? What what's up with that? I mean, unless you get into some heated political or moral debate every time and you clash about everything, then that maybe I could understand why it's coming between you guys. The fact that they're saying you're not a good person because some of your mother's that's that's on them. That is their problem. That's not a you problem. Now, if they say that his mom's family is from Israel and it's influencing him and he's being a and he's right and he's disturbing the peace of his woman's life, or what about the children, or I don't know what. Well, that's not a claim. If that's their claim, that's no claim at all. That's simply stating a fact. Okay, they're from Israel. 12 points, 12 points. Now what? As long as you're treating your woman right, I'm assuming that it's a woman. It might not be, but if you're treating your partner properly, that's it. They got nothing to say. They can try. And then the question becomes, if they try to break you up, do you trust your partner? Do they have your back? That's what it comes down to. But it's not a problem that you have. So, it's not a you problem, it's a they problem. I'm sorry to hear that you're not good because of it. I'm sorry to hear that you're going through it. It sounds like a pain in the ass. I'm going to be back in the chat here. For now, let's read a couple of comments from the last couple of days and one from 2 months ago. Okay, so little Andre was wondering about the Torah scroll that the king is supposed to write. We were going back and forth, right? He was telling me what he thinks about it, or as he sees it. And he says, why does it say he puts it on his left shoulder? Now, I was mistaken. Halacha actually says the right shoulder, and that it's not a must. Now, I didn't think it was a must. It was simply like tradition that the king makes a sort of miniature Torah and literally ties it onto doesn't brand it, right? He ties it onto his right shoulder or arm. Now, I mentioned, I don't remember if it was, I think it was like yesterday or at some point recently, a couple of days ago, I mentioned that idea of the king and of the Torah sort of bringing him into a center, because what the kingship represents is the divine feminine energy, and the Torah is sort of masculine in its energy. So he says, from my understanding, he had to have an exact copy of the entire Torah. This is also disputed in halacha in any way, that he needed to have certain bits of the Torah, but not the entire thing, mainly speaking of the book of Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken. Now he says, where does it say? So I told him, Rambam, Maimonides, he cites that halacha in his book Mishneh Torah, brought down from our sages, and the general idea is that it centers the king. And so he says that he probably thought it would be a rabbinic writing. And wait, what else does he say? That's why the king, right? The king was only commanded to have a copy made with all the resources he had at his disposal, meaning it had to come from him and what he had at his disposal, and that's what he used. And he wouldn't take outside, right? He wouldn't borrow or take or tax in order to facilitate the writing of the scroll. It had to be, little Andre says, something he made with all the resources he had at his disposal. Now you could argue a king ascending the throne, he has many resources at his disposal, but maybe it goes even deeper than that. And it has to be from his own personal kind of, I don't know, but so, and he asks, what do you mean when you say it centers the king? So I said, the Torah which the king writes, the scroll which the king writes, regardless of the scale, or if he ties it on physically onto his body, not 24/7, right? When he sleeps, when he showers, when he bathes, I don't know what he takes it off. But I told him three things the Torah does, in my opinion, the Torah scroll. A, it keeps the king humble, mindful, and honest because it's Torah and commandments and covenant, and it guides you in a certain way, and it tells you don't be proud, it tells you don't tell lies, it tells you don't cause dissent, and for no reason, rather, don't go and be a good boy and girl of God. Second, it keeps the king in his place in a positive way, the king's place in the divine revelation, because there's the idea of the king and the kingship, and then there's the idea of God's name, one of them being the King of Kings, Melech Malchei HaMelachim. By keeping the king in his place, I mean showing him where he stands and what it is that he ought to be receiving and sending back up. Let's put it that way. And the third, I said, it keeps the Torah, which the king writes, keeps the divine feminine influence manifested by the kingship and the king himself. It keeps it in union with the masculine energy of the Torah. And together they can birth something new, which is also why the king and the kingship is prone to malevolence and tyranny, the misuse of power, which is why, unlike other commoners, the king is not allowed to marry more than a certain amount of wives. The king is not allowed to have too much treasure, too much gold. The king is not allowed to bring the people back to Egypt in order to get more horses and material goods. And when different kings were surrounding those of the kings of Judah, and their enemies were closing in, there was more than once times when they shipped off the gold and the silver and the treasures in the house of God and in the house of the king, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe one, maybe the other, maybe both. Definitely from the house of God. And because several kings did this in order to bribe or pay, right, pay a tax which was levied on them by an external conqueror or would-be conqueror, and they shipped that off. And on one hand, you could say, what do you mean? How could they ship off all the things that Solomon, the king, and all the ones after him, the kings of Judah, and I was going to give it away? You know, but yeah, the king should not. The king should not. It's. I think it's. I think it has its inner logic, if you will, that the kings would send off all that treasure and gold and silver if it was desired or wanted, but it did get the job done at least once or twice, if I'm not mistaken, and got some would-be conqueror or enemy off their butts. Let's see if there's any comments about that. Okay, so we'll continue in the chat, and then I'll go into another comment from 2 months ago that I want to address. So, Angel's Life says, please say a prayer for God to protect me from my in-laws, like God protected King David when he went into battle against Goliath. Robert says to Angel's Life, hang in there and do what's right in God's eye. I concur with Robert, and I really do hope that if it is as baseless as you're saying, come on, Angel's Life, have some confidence in your way, and I hope that you will be able to weather this storm. I hope you'll be able to be a good partner, a solid partner, and that they will eventually come around because they see that no matter what your family does, you are you, and you're doing what's right by your partner. And King David, when he went into battle against Goliath, he told him, you're coming with me with your armor and your shield, your sword, and I'm coming in the name of the Most High, which you have desecrated. And like Robert said, keep on doing what's right in God's eye, and I hope that you find favor in the eyes of God and man, and that includes your in-laws. Robert continues and says, reading about the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 30. Yes, Ha'azinu. Your own book of Deuteronomy. Right, the king, according to one halacha anyway, according to one teaching or way of teaching halacha, it's mainly that book. Maybe that's probably the eventual halacha which came down, that it's only the book of Deuteronomy. Much like when the king would read on the Holiday of Atonement, it was the king, right? Yes, if I'm not mistaken. On a Holiday of Atonement, or was it the high priest? The high priest reads on the Holiday of Atonement. And he reads certain parts. And then he rolls up the scroll and he puts it in his lap and he says, there's more written here than what I've said. It's like, I've given you these pillars We've reenacted them. We read them again. We felt them again. Now go and do your thing, Israel. Okay, let's continue here. Um, the user Your Thought on the video is the Hebrew Nazarite, a Jewish monk, and that's a video from around 4 years ago. And he says, I am a Nazarite. We aren't supposed to eat condiments as well, since most condiments other than soy sauce contain vinegar, which is alcohol as well. Now, this goes back to the idea of the Nazarite abstaining from vinegar. In the biblical, in the Mosaic, in the Torah law, it's vinegar of wine, strong drink with wine, not vinegar of grains. And most of the mainstream vinegar, which is in the food industry, bulk of it, as far as I can tell, is grains and not grapes. And as such, it's permissible to the Nazarite man or woman to partake of them. But for many years, as those who follow may know, I abstained from all vinegar to be on the safe side. So he continues and he says, I actually make my own non-vinegar versions to appease my hunger. So he does non-vinegar condiments, which I wanted to do but didn't do, and have recently started eating them again, certain ones that are vegan, even if they say vinegar, because I know that it's not wine vinegar. It's not grape vinegar. I can actually consume it. Now, and I answered him here, but I'll give my thoughts on the idea, because he says, other than soy sauce, it contains vinegar, which is alcohol as well. Now, we're not supposed to abstain from alcohol, though I did take it on myself as a side thing, as an addition. The Nazarite man or woman are not commanded to abstain from alcohol. They're commanded to abstain from the fruit and the produce and the products of grapes. Big difference. And regarding the idea of, is the Hebrew Nazarite a Jewish monk? At the time in the video, if I'm not mistaken, I would say that I don't think we are monks. I think it's something a little different, seeing as how the Buddhists and the Christians go about it in a different way. And while it is a kind of monastic or ascetic living to some degree, it's not necessarily, you can be a man of the people. You don't have to be a guru on a mountain or in some cave, though that doesn't hurt to do for a time. But you're deeply steeped in the earth, deeply steeped in the kingdom, as it were. So he's like monks. So he disagrees kind of with me on the alcohol, right, and versus grapes, and he disagrees on the idea of, are we monks? He says we are like monks. We are separated not only from secular society in the laws we live by, but also Jewish society in the stringency of the laws we live by. Which I agree. Does that make us more monkish? Probably. Being separate, he says, is literally the definition of holiness. Correct. He continues and says, our Nazariteship is a chance to live as a Kohen, even a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, even if you weren't born as one. And this is a third thing where we differ on. So we differ on the idea of alcohol versus grapes. We differ on the idea of monks or not monks. And we differ on the idea of the Nazarite as a chance to live as a priest or a high priest. I answer him, and I'll read my answer now. What I said was, you are right that we are monks in the sense of separation and apart. As for the priesthood, I disagree somewhat. The priesthood wears a crown of oil and gold. The Nazariteship wears a crown of hair. That's part of what makes a big difference in where the Nazariteship takes its essence, its divine energy and influence from, while the priesthood takes its divine energy and essence from a very, very high place, the right hand, known as Chesed, the Nazariteship, right, and where Chesed has its in Chochmah, right, in the right brain, in the right hemisphere of the brain, or left if you're looking at it, in the tree of life, the higher right. There's the lower right and there's the higher right, the right hand and the right brain. And the Nazariteship goes above that to the crown, where it's not male, female, chokhmah, bina. It's not. It's something that stands outside and above it. So the priesthood wears a crown of oil, which is a liquid, and gold, which is a metal. But the Nazariteship wears a crown of hair that grows from within, And that's in part what makes a big difference. Now, halachically speaking, they do overlap in some ways. But whereas the priest needs only to abstain from wine and strong drink during service in the temple, the Nazarite is commanded to abstain from wine and strong drink of wine at all times. Let's go back to the chat, see if there's anything going on there. Do you believe the world will end? Asks Team Mangwa. Well, if by world you mean this current divine revelation, then I don't think it will end. I think much like energy itself, it transitions. We are now in this physical world acting out something which has already been decided, as it were. And I don't mean as a deterministic philosophy that's actionable in this life. Not like that. But they say, for instance, of the Sabbath, that it was the final deed was the first thought. In other words, if a person wants to raise a building, not raise it, I mean build it, raise it up, this person usually has a vision in his mind of what it would look like, of how it would be, and of way to go about it. All of these things exist in the mind of the visionary. And what happens in the end, the final thing that's put in, it starts with something that's already built in the mind of, in the mind's eye, in the visionary's mind, and the way that he looks at it. That building is already built, and now it's simply executing it. And that idea of the world, of eating from the fruit of the tree of life in the right place at the right time, in the right state of mind, as it were, that's already been sort of declared. And now we are simply acting it out and putting the pieces together and doing our part, beings, to facilitate and embody that image of God and that divine influence and revelation that we are meant to channel and be a part of. We are supposed to be active players in this game of creation. And in and in the transitioning of this world starts with us as individuals and like a like a hold on a second. I gotta yes. Like like circles that right when you throw a rock and a stone into a river and the ripples go outward. Whoops, that's what's going on here. So do I believe the world will end? What do you mean by end, and what do you mean by world? Because I just ranted for a few minutes about just what I think, but you may think something else entirely. So T Mangwa, do tell me, do you believe the world will end? What do you mean by end? What do you mean by world? Oh, this is so nice. The 15th of Av. I'm going to reminisce a little bit now about that mushroom trip because the video is gone. Tu B'Av, 3 years ago, I'll give you the bottom line. I went into that journey, I did that ceremony alone in order to face some of my demons, let's say, skeletons in my closet, not deep ones, but there nonetheless. And when I arrived at that place and when I confronted them in the way that I confronted them, again, I might add, not necessarily because I've been putting it off or repressing but simply because I wanted to encounter it from that different angle of speaking with the mushroom and the mushroom speaking through me, as it were, having that dialogue. I discovered that there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to doubt. I just need to keep doing what I'm doing, and in the course of time, in due season, the things will not only straighten out, but prove themselves as necessary for turning me into who I might be. And all I need to do is learn from my mistakes and try to do better. As simple as that. And not beat myself up and not crack the whip as often. And that wonderful ceremony that I had on Tu B'Av 3 years ago, it was exactly what I needed. It was so blessed. It was so amazing. I felt like Moses on the mountain, receiving the law, only on a much smaller scale with me and the continuation of where I'm going. And it's not that I needed it, or it's simply I wanted to look at a few things from another angle, from an expanded mind that's expanded by the mushroom. Let's continue in the chat here. Let's Essen said, did the Kohen and Korach switch off who would carry the ark? Negative. The priests do not carry the ark. The ones who carry the ark are the people of Kehat, and the ones who cover the ark before it's carried, and the ones who unveil the ark after it's carried, and who the high priest has services done on Yom Kippur, on the Holiday of Atonement, those are the priests. Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, I don't think they switched off. I think that he wanted to be as a high priest. I think that he wanted that unity of left and right. He was aiming at the right thing, but he was going about it perhaps in a wrong way. And because of that, it happened what had happened. And instead of unity, there was separation and a plague, and well, let's leave it at that. Angela McKee, hello, hello, hello. So McKee, is it Irish? Is it Scottish? New to your channel. Thank you for subscribing. Hello, hello, or viewing. I don't know if you subscribed. I wouldn't presume, but hey, good to have you here, Angela. So new to your channel. Thank you for your time and character. Wow, I am humbled by your words. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your attention. As for character, I'm always, or who's to say always, I'm continually working on my character. And it's days like today, like Tu B'Av, that are here to remind us to give room and acknowledge and be mindful of the good things. Because you could make the argument that the fact that one of the things that make it such a joyous day is the fact that people who were dead for a few days, or was it weeks, were finally brought to proper burial. How is that something to celebrate? But no, at the time when they stood their ground and they were right against that and going against the Romans, rebelling, to come back to the earth, it also means that not only is the job done because you're dead, it's time now to again transform. Death and transformation go hand in hand. And the idea of the body not being delayed from reuniting with the earth in the Hebrew faith, especially in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the people who bury the Hebrew folk here, they make it their mission, if possible, if at all possible, to not delay the burial. They'll do it. They'll do it really, really close to sundown, even if they'll really make it happen, especially in Jerusalem and generally in Israel and in Hebrew, Jewish halacha, and the Hebrew faith, where we are not supposed to be delaying the body's reuniting with the earth, the body's that unity with the earth. It's in Genesis, right, where we come from, and you could argue conceptually, physically. It's where we come from, and it's where and it's where we return to. And so it's you could argue that having someone return to the ground and burying them and at the time of the Roman, revolt and all that and the destruction of the temple. But no, it's finding those righteous things, finding those heroic things, finding those little things and making them great and making them more grand by giving them the time and the attention that they deserve. And something that this day signifies, things this day signifies, the 15th of Av, right? Love and camaraderie, unity, coming together of the tribes, of individuals, marriage, returning to the earth, all of it together. It's a good vibe, despite it being a kind of bittersweet vibe. There was something there which our sages said, no, pay attention. Not only is this a joyous celebration, but it's on par in its happiness and its goodness with Yom Kippur with the Holiday of Atonement. And that speaks to the idea of tshuva, of returning, repentance, because part of the idea of the Holiday of Atonement is to atone and to receive that atonement and run with it and return then to oneself with a clearer slate and conscience, if you will. And with returning to the earth and with returning to mixing between the tribes instead of separating them, there's a kind of correspondence there. So the 15th of Av is a very special day. Give time and space and the mind in order to contemplate and acknowledge these ideas of camaraderie and of love, of unity, of coming together that can also lead you to repenting, to tshuva, because it also gets you to question, perhaps, in a good way and a bad way, where is it that you're going? What are the bonds and covenants and unities that you are acting out? And where could you do better? Where could you be more loving? Where could you be more of a good person? Let's continue here in the chat. Robert says, it says that when Israel crossed the Jordan, the priest was bearing the ark when the Jordan parted. Hmm. That is correct. That's correct. It does. And when they put their feet in the Jordan, then it split. I think that because it was one last schlep, in the sense of the Levites, the Kehatim, would carry. The clan of Kehat would carry the ark in between the different comings and goings in the desert. Because when it's mentioned in connection to the desert. You know, where you're going to go? You go in, right? The tribes of Israel went in formation, in a very significant and specific formation. They erected the camp in a certain way, and they took it apart in a certain way, and they left in a certain way, and they came to make camp in a certain way. So in that context, it was the family of Kehat, the clan of Kehat, which carried it from place to place. It could very well be that for that final schlep across the Jordan, we're leaving the desert. Then it was the priests, because because there was a different divine revelation that had to come into being connected with that ark. I can definitely see how that could be the case. It could also be that I'm talking out of my ass, but because the Kohanim and the Leviim represent the right hand and the left hand, and the ark represents the lower center, or the low point of of Malchut, of the feminine, could very well be that because the Leviim are the left side, also associated with the feminine energy, that it was the Kohanim, the right side, the giving side, Chesed, that had to bring in across the Jordan. It's interesting. I actually hadn't thought of it in that way, though I've read it many times. I don't think that they switched off regularly. I think they did it at the time, but for a certain reason. I might be wrong. Angela McKee says, God bless from the US. I haven't been to the US in so many years. So many years. Also, speaking of, no, never mind. When was the last time I was in the States? I think it was 2006. Could that be? Angela, do tell. Don't dox yourself, but do tell. Where are you from? My parents hail from New York. I have lots of family there still. And I have some family on the West Coast. And I have a connection to the United States, and I am a citizen, though I'm not American in that sense. So, what do you think about? You tell me. It's ironic because I'm asking, where do you think the U.S. is going? Do tell. Wait a second. I'm gonna take a look at the time here. Okay. Let's see. One more question. Let's go with one more question, and then maybe say goodbye. Though I'm really enjoying this hang, but I won't keep on broadcasting of hanging. If you guys don't have anything more to say, if there are no other questions, concerns, complaints, or things you'd want to talk about, then I might say goodbye. I don't want to press it. But let's see. I wanted. There were other questions and comments recently. I'm trying to remember. Little Andre, as always, highly prolific with a lot of comments. Oh, okay. So here we go. So little Andre said, I heard the number 613, meaning 613 commandments, traditionally, were invented by the rabbinite sages, the rabbis, based on the gematria. It was never actually counted by them, at least not at the time. Now, I don't know if it was counted at the time or not, and I answered him saying that there have been many scholars and rabbis, right, sages over time who have enumerated the mitzvahs, the commandments, and have reached 613. They agree on the number in general. They don't necessarily agree with all of the commandments. Some of them they do count, some of them they don't, but they always get to 613, and the bulk of them they are in agreement on. Now, little Andre said, yes, but sometimes they split a commandment into do's and don'ts and count them each as its own commandment. Now, I told him that this idea of the gematria of 613 and the do's and the don'ts and why they're both counted. Well, I'll read it. What I told him, it's right. The origin is most likely rabbinic, as you said. I said, but it's not without significance. The gematria, because the do's and don'ts and the numbers, which is 248 do's and 365 don'ts, together 613, they each correspond to certain, and some say very specific, parts of the human anatomy and physiology. So the different do's and don'ts correspond to organs, tendons, to the different vessels in the body. And it's a kind of thing where think of the commandments and the Torah as you creating a body. It's like in a womb, right? It's like in utero, and it's being created by you with your actions or abstaining, right? Or lack thereof. That's creating a kind of wholeness, which is why they say you ought to do, or right, you ought to perform a mitzvah, to perform a commandment wholeheartedly, be it a do or a don't. And Hasidism, right? Hasidism took it a major leap forward. And Hasidim, right? Hasids many times, and others, before they act out a mitzvah or a prayer, they will say Leshem Yichud Kudsha Brichu Ushchinte, which literally is in Aramaic, and it means for the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and His Shekhinah, and His divine feminine presence, bringing that unity. So the mitzvahs represent a kind of spiritual body that we are weaving and creating and bringing to, and making together, and bringing together, much like the human body is formed in utero. As an analogy, right? We are forming our own spiritual body with the commandments, something like that. Or if not a body, then a garment. People liken it to garments as well. And I said, what was it? Okay, so he said, oh, I'm sorry. So the human physiology and anatomy, and he said that's interesting. So there are those who counted them after all, and yes, there are a few. And how many did they count? So it would be 613 across the board. Little Andre continued and said, I've seen an online list of the verses of 613. Many of them are split, right? So what we said. And he says the gematria corresponding to the commandments, I'm not sure if I understand clearly what's significant about it. So that's what I kind of explained right now about the do's and don'ts and the numbers and the way they correspond. Uh, this idea of the Torah and the commandments that you keep being you building something and creating something. This is again why we are called the image of God. We are doers, movers, shakers, and creators. And the people of Israel received this specific Torah. And while you can argue over splitting commandments into do's and don'ts, the idea is that there is a root commandment, but it also has its nuances and its subtleties. And this is across the board. And there are many halachas inside of those commandments and inside the roots. Now, the roots sometimes might be one. That's a separate issue. But altogether, 613 corresponding with different organs and tendons and pieces of us. It all comes together to remind us that this Torah that we are trying to act out is our life. It doesn't mean that it needs to be only the only thing you do, but it's something that your life can center on, revolve around, and go in accordance with. Now, I pick and choose everything. I'm a cherry picker. I pick and choose, and I make no apologies. And with gematria, again, it might be tricky, and some people would say maybe it's forced and contrived. But I don't see it that way. I'm biased, but I don't see it that way personally. Let's see. Where were we? We were here. Angela says, sorry, I'm driving. I'm from DC. Oh, first, don't apologize. Second, if you're driving, get off the channel and keep your eyes on the road and keep your mind on the surroundings. Robert Harrison says, IL. Is that what? What's that? Is that a I don't know what that emoji is. I know, I'll copy and paste it, and that way I'll know. Huh? Not just a hat rack. It's a handshake, that's what it is. Okay, it's a handshake emoji. So IL handshake UM. Uh, Not sure what you mean. IL might be Israel or Illinois, and UM be So if you mean that I'm shaking hands with I certainly am. Uh, Okay. Hey, Jesus is in the house. Hey, Jesus. Jeeves, GEDJS, DJ Eases. Let's continue here. Oh, wait, I lost my spot. Here it is. And Jesus returned Robert's hello, and he says, anything to say, Jesus, is little South African Andre Dreyer? Is it true he turned into a Rastafarian Nazir? Okay, you're asking Jesus, I suppose, so we'll see. I watched yesterday's video when I went to bed, said Jesus. Had some questions, but I'm afraid I lost the plot. LMAO. Are you, which one? Are you talking about yesterday's broadcast or my interview with Christian Homestead? Either way, if you lost something, it's probably because I was lost and not you, so I take full responsibility. That was good. Oh well, he says it'll come back to me some other time, I'm sure. Jesus, says Robert, would you ever take the Nazarite vow? We'll look at that. That's a good question. JJ Johnson, hello, hello, hello. Reminds me of JJJ from Spider-Man. What is it, John Jonah Jameson? No, I'm not sure. Yeah, John Jonah Jameson. I loved your interview with Christian Homestead yesterday. I did too. And just subscribed to your channel. Many thanks, I appreciate it. I live in Utah, USA, so I'm assuming you're a Mormon there. Thank you, Christian Homestead YouTube, for bringing us the Hebrew. Well, it says Nazarene. I'm assuming you mean Nazarene. Now, Nazarene means of Nazrat, of Nazareth. Nazarite means under the vow of the Nazarite. And although many people think they're interchangeable, classically and certainly according to the Hebrew, they are not because they utilize different letters in their root. Jesus says, I do recall enjoying your answers again, Yona. I'm not as familiar with the books as you know, but I love how we are seemingly on the same wavelength. Yeah, because I think certain things in certain books and teachings are kind of intuitive or speak to a kind of human intuition. And so even if someone is not that familiar, if you give them let's say headlines and subtitles or whatnot, they can see that there's something there despite not being able to understand. And I'm saying that about myself. Obviously, I'm counting myself in there as well. That because I don't have a lot of knowledge either. It's certain things simply grab our attention, right, and settle in a deeper place than other things. We attribute some sort of significance to them, and so we would strive conceptually or practically to be more like that. And I'm glad that we are on the same wavelength. I think that at times I speak of things that are very niche, but at times I think I speak of things that are highly universal, like generally universal, or could be. Jesus says, I kinda am, no vow yet, but the hair is growing long. So you know what? With the hair growing long, how are you feeling about it? I mean, how do you how is this the first time you've grown out your hair? Is it in dreads? Forgive me, I don't even remember. Paula says, hi Jonathan, I'm driving, so I can't say much. I hope you are well. Yes, I am well. I'm having so much fun here right now with you guys. It's such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Let's continue. Nah, says Jesus, when I go to bed, my head starts spinning with questions, and I usually forget them the next day. Well, having a notebook next to bed, whether it's for dreams or wonderments or questions, is a very blessed thing. Um, because there are certain things that happen when you're in bed and when that shift is about to take place. There are many things leading us towards sleep, right? Before the melatonin simply washes over us and we lose consciousness and we go into that sleep state, there are different, again, physiology. There are different physiological processes that start to they start when we first wake up, really, and when we go into the sunlight, if I'm not mistaken. I heard someone say that recently, a neuropsychologist. I don't recall. I think it was Andrew Huberman. At any rate, so if you're forgetful, maybe put a little notebook or pencil, pad, pen, next to your bed. Jesus, write them down. Yes, you know what? I said it, and then you wrote it, or you wrote it, and then I said it. Either way, see, same wavelength, Robert. Same wave. Jesus says, I remember you talking about being interested in Kabbalah, but not a practitioner. How would you get into it? And am I right to presume that you tread those concepts with caution? Well, as you know, I don't consider myself a Kabbalist. I am a student of the Tree of Life. I have been ever since I was 16. And uh, I feel that in some ways, there's a heavy influence of Kabbalah in my life in the sense of Kabbalah means to receive, and I am attempting to the best of my ability, sometimes less than the best, to make myself a vessel, expand my being and my mind and my radius in order to be able to take in more without the light overpowering me, without the oil putting out the wick and the flame in the process, right? Overrunning and putting out the flame. So to do those so with caution, definitely. Always to start off with a master, as far as I'm concerned. And yes, and always be grounded because Kabbalah can make you fly very high, as it were, conceptually. So to always ground it in practical way of life, pillars of action, commandments, and covenant, and embodying it, acting it out in the world, having it be part of your life, that helps. Much like the Torah helps to ground and humble the king, um, being a practical individual, a person who lives in the world, it helps to ground the idea of Kabbalah, I think. Now, there are some who are supposed to fly with it and go with it, but I think that the majority of Kabbalists that I've known and people that they are people who are everyday people who do their thing, and they are Kabbalists, and they're just, ordinary people, but not, you know, uh, but different. So how'd I get into it? I got into it because at age 14, 15, growing up religious, I started asking questions. My brother wasn't religious anymore. My older brother were four. I was second. So my elder brother, he decided to turn away from the faith, from religion. If not from the faith, then from religion, right? And regardless, I was always a curious individual, very much into studying astronomy and a very, very low level concept of astrophysics, like in Dr. Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, which I read in seventh grade and reread since. For my graduation from eighth grade and going into high school, my parents bought me a book on the universe and all of the. So there was that, and that was I was always trying for many years. I was trying to sort of reconcile Genesis in Genesis and the physical reality that we live in and the Big Bang, the origins of the universe, and see how we can. My mother and I, right? My mother was a a doctor of biochemistry and a researcher, and she and I would speak on many Shabbos nights, right? Many Friday nights after the first meal, we would sit with a cup of tea and talk and talk and talk for hours. The the curiosity was there and the way was there because I had been, thank God, I had been studying Torah and I was sort of, for better or worse, indoctrinated with Orthodox religion of Judaism, right, rabbinic religion. So I had a of experiences and information to now start to connect the dots and see where do I stand in all of it. And when I heard of this hidden, it's not really hidden, it's in plain sight, but people consider it hidden, and it's called Chokhmat Hanistar, the lore, the hidden lore. When I understood that there is something hidden right behind the veil of this world, I was like, oh yes, that. I'm definitely doing that. Definitely. Because if I'm trying to ask the more difficult questions about who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going, how could I not ask those questions and go for the deeper answers? And it doesn't mean that I forsake the run of the mill, mainstream, everyday life answers. It means that I want to live that life, but still keep digging. And I have never stopped digging. I dig up, I dig down. So it's very practical to proceed with caution. And it's, I mean, the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, in his introduction, his opening prayer, and no, the opening prayer is different. In his short introduction to Pardes Rimonim, his magnum opus, he writes, "We beseech the one who would be reading this book to not uh, to not enter the gates if he has not been handed the keys." In other words, he's trying to say, only enter through the gates of this book and this lore and this wisdom when you've already been given a tool to work with, keys. Right? To quote Pirates of the Caribbean, I think it's the second one. Right? Jack Sparrow, gentlemen, what do keys do? No, it's the third one, I think. So one of the sailors answers, keys unlock things. So yes, keys unlock things. They're a means to an end, and the that door and that gate of Kabbalah and the different ways of entering and the different paths that it leads you down, you need to hold the right set of keys. Because let's say, it's the key that you receive might open the door. It's not just that one key opens it, it's plural. It's many gates and many keys, something like that. And it needs to be the proper key in the proper gate for the proper path. Obviously, at times, we need to veer off the path, and that comes with its own sacrifice and its own results and its own burden, I suppose. But when you speak of Kabbalah and of receiving, and you decide to go off to a different path, you could be then receiving from a different channel, channeling that through, especially with those who teach others. That therein lies a danger. And that's why our sages said that it's the deeper teachings, the deeper teachings of Kabbalah have never been written down, ever. They always pass orally from master to apprentice, right? From rabbi to pupil. And so the deeper things, the deeper things were never written. What's written are things that we ought to be studying. However, we need to do so with due caution and due diligence, at proper time and place. That's just me speaking from my experiences, but I think that many who have learned and practiced this lore, that they would agree with me. But I'm not a Kabbalist. I'm a student of the Tree of Life. That's what I always was when I started 20 odd years ago, and it's what I still consider myself to be, though I never phrased it that way at the time. I've only phrased it that way a few years ago when I understood that I want to walk that path, and that I have apparently spent many years on and off, but years devoting time to these studies in order for it to be as practical as can be. And these higher teachings run the deepest and the lowest, and from there you can make it shoot right back up with with your own with your own unique influence, right, as the image of God. So yeah, tread lightly, tread with caution, have a master, and always be grounding yourself, and always be remembering that God has no eye or ear or arm. God is not the 10 sfirot. It's how God reveals himself in creation. It is the idea of creation, the Tensfirot, as opposed to creator. In different ways and teachings of Kabbalah, different ways of receiving, certainly with the Ari and with others, there's a danger of not having enough of a difference between creator and creation. And I think that's why the Ramak, before the Ari did his thing, the Ramak bringing down the wisdom up until the time of the Ari, he's always saying to the reader, make sure, pay attention, remember that you remember what we're talking about here. First time this long, Jesus says, no dreads. So your hair is, you're going with it, but no dreads. I guess my vow could be to detach from the world. So yeah, I and many others will probably trip over my hair in the coming years. That's very cool. J.J. Johnson says, I'm sorry I misspelled Nazarene. Yes, you did, but even that, right? It's Nazarite. I'd like to learn more about why you don't cut your hair. I love your long hair. Well, thank you, first of all. I love it too. You don't cut the hair because the hair represents a kind of divine energy and revelation. The hair represents harmony and beauty in the higher form as opposed to the lower form. And that's why it's represented by the hair, which is called a crown, Nazir, Nazarite. Nazir is Nazarite in Hebrew. Nazir meaning somebody who abstains, somebody who is set apart, somebody who is sacred, somebody who wears a crown. Now, as I said in the interview with Christian Homestead there, these are all things that I don't for a second think that I've attained, but it's striving towards and what we are trying to work in accordance with and live by, that idea of the crown, of keter. So we don't cut our hair for the same reason that others who are not Nazarites are commanded to cut their hair and not let it grow long, certain people. Or the king of Israel, who is commanded to cut his hair every day or at least once a week because of what everyday folk who are not Nazarites represent, a certain divine revelation. Because of what the king represents, a certain divine revelation, they are commanded to keep their hair short. And as you know, or might know, there are certain people, I one of them for many years, that have side curls, that have a shaved or almost shaved or short hair, and two long side curls. They can be short, they can be long. Long side curls, predominantly in Hasidic communities, but I wasn't a Hasid and not of a specific sect or group, right? And I grew them for many years. I, in fact, never shaved them off. I never cut them off. They're still inside, but now it's part of this. So I still have my payas, I still have my side curls. So and when I did grow them out, I grew them out for that very reason. The Nazarite man or woman, their hair represents a kind of divine energy that we are trying to manifest and draw from and channel into creation. And as such, no razor shall come upon it, and we are commanded to let it grow wild. People differ on what it means to grow wild. Halacha, Jewish law, has many, many different laws. If my channel had not been deleted, I had dozens and dozens and dozens of, of videos on the different laws and halachas of the Nazariteship. Oh well, it was not meant to be for long, but I loved doing them. So thank you again, JJ. I appreciate it, and I hope I answered your question. Or if you want to learn, ask me anything. Right? This is an AMA, right? Ask me anything. I'm definitely down for continuing this hang. I love Andrew Huberman. Is it Huberman or Huberman? Looking at the sun in the morning and evening helps regulate your circadian rhythm. Right, precisely, which is why I have a newfound appreciation, as if I needed it, for walking with my doggo, right? Walking with Pinky. I'm getting even more out of it now that I know that from the very beginning, I'm actually making myself better prepared for sleep. And now this corresponds with halacha, if I'm going to take it to that end, and Jewish living, where the first thing that, according to halacha, a person says is a short prayer of thanks, without mentioning the name of God, but mentioning the name of king. Speaking of the kingship. mentioning the name of the living and existing king, Melech Chai V'Kayam, which is a name you're allowed to say in impurity because it's not one of the 7 sacred names. So you're allowed to call God king, and that's cool, even if you had just woken up before you purified yourself with water. And at night, again, according to halacha, we recite what's called the Shema. It's a prayer with the verses from the Torah, which is meant to sort of take on before sleep the yoke of Torah and commandments and the kingship of the Most High. So it's bookending it that way. And the idea of the sun in the morning and the name Yod He Vav He is represented by the sun primarily. It's very much in tune with all of that. So I love that. Bro, your subs are growing, says Robert. Yes, my subs are growing thanks to Christian Homestead. It's been like 12, I think, in the last 24 hours, and I'm very thankful for each and every one of them, whether they, engage or not. I'm thankful for the subs. Robert says, I have new revelations about the Mount of Olives. What comes from olives? Oil. For what? Anointing oil, which is why David walked up that mount barefooted, and Yeshua foot will touch that mount. It is anointed mount, Har HaZeitim. Yes, it's also called Har HaMishcha. That is correct. That is correct. If I'm not mistaken, is Har HaMishcha Har HaZeitim? I think it is. Har HaMishcha. Har HaMishcha. Is it? Yes, Shmo Shel Har HaZeitim. So yes, I just Wikipedia that. It is the same name. That's what I thought. I didn't want to get it wrong. But yes, it's the Mount of Olives is called the Mountain of Anointing. So you're absolutely right, and your words align with the revelations of the sages. Anointed Mount, yes indeed. Angela McKee, pulled over to right. I drive for my job. Oh wow. I hope you're safe out there. So don't worry, discovered you from Christian Homestead as well, and I'm also Latter-day Saints. Forgive my ignorance. Females take the Nazarite vow? Yes, they do. The verses in Numbers 6 say, speak to the children of Israel, right, and tell them if a man or a woman would want to make a wonder and take on the Nazarite vow, here's how they do it. So man or woman, ish or isha, man or woman of the children of Israel, right there in the verses. So yes, females take the Nazarite vow. I knew a few Christian, not digitally, a few Christian female Nazarites, but right, I don't consider them technically halachically Nazarites, but they did take on the vow in their life. So they took it on, regardless of whether or not they must adhere to the commandments and the Torah. They did it as accepting something that they were called to do, and in that sense, they took it on. So I'm not differentiating for the sake of this back and forth over here, Angela. So females take the Nazarite vow, yes, and there is one Orthodox female, Jewish Orthodox, right, Hebrew female Nazarite, which I know of, called Sarah Eisenman. If you're interested, I spoke with her on my channel. There's in the homepage of the channel, there's dialogues. I used to have many. Now I have just the one, which occurred sometime earlier this year. I spoke with her. We keep in touch. She's not the traditional halachic Nazarite, but she did take on the vow in her own way. So, and many of the Nazarites that I speak with take it on and put their own spin or do it in their own unique, vibe. So yeah, females do take the Nazarite vow, and I see that as a very blessed and amazing thing to those who are called to it, that they actually take it on. Jesus says, well, if times ever get biblical, dude, I'm in Jerusalem right now. It's pretty biblical out here. You're my rabbi. I appreciate that. Although, again, I'm not a rabbi, and I'm not a scholar, and I'm not someone who you should follow necessarily, because I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. Because I don't know that this path is right for anyone but me. And even within that assertion that it might be right for me, even that, is dubious at times. But I'm certainly, I want to be the best Yonatan that I can be. No more, no less. Right now, and it seems for until my last breath, this seems to be vibing with me very hard. So I'm glad that you call me a rabbi, your rabbi. I don't think I merit it, but that's on you. So if you think I do, I deeply appreciate it. Um, you think you might ever go through the Torah and such again chronologically with your thoughts injected afterwards? So, do you mean physically, literally go through the entire Torah, verse by verse, book by book, or do you mean Oh, you mean again chronologically? So you're talking about the weekly Torah portions, I think. Is that what you're talking about? That would take a lot of your time, of course. So maybe you are talking about straight through the Tanakh, through the Torah. And I know you love this current format. You got any recommendations, like other YouTube channels you find interesting? Well, look, with YouTube, I'm very much still what I was doing before. I listen to podcasts. I listen to Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom. And usually it will be like an individual. Recently, I've been more into Douglas Murray. I love the way he speaks. I haven't read any of his books, but I've listened to many of his recent podcasts. I haven't been lately with Gary Vee, but Gary Vee is still somebody who I recommend to people if they are in need of some Gary Veeism. And of course, I'm still such a Petersonian. I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson. So I don't know of other YouTube channels, music and podcasts. There's nobody that I follow like regularly. I think people I follow here and there, but on the regular, I don't follow people like religiously, and I go with them, and maybe that's to my detriment. But that's simply the what it is at the time, right now. And I do love this current format. I just returned to it, I mean, I just returned to broadcasting regularly after a few months of what would be touch and go, right? Where it was kind of here and properly broadcasting. And I'm full of, I have a prayer, I pray. I'm sending this out into the world. May I be able to continue broadcasting um, and, well, continue, and it won't be a hindrance because hindrance will come. Hindrances will present themselves, but may I not be hindered by this lingering cough. What means more to you, asks Robert, being a Levite or being a Nazarite? Or do you look at them the same? Plus, that's so cool. I walk also to sleep better. Yeah, it is very cool to walk in order to sleep. I mean, Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, where he says, you gotta walk, you gotta do it, you gotta just walk. It'll do things to you. You have, it'll. Hang on, the toddler is on the baby monitor. I'll be right back. Hang on. Yeah, he's fine. But I'll keep my voice down for a minute or two. Let's see. So, what means more to me? Uh, they're not the same because for me, it's a different kind of covenant. The covenant of Levi I was born into, the covenant of the Nazarite on myself. That's a big difference. They are the same in the sense of that I feel like I have a kinship, to put it the way Christian Homestead put it. I have a kinship with those covenants, with those paths, with those ways. And I think that that comes into play heavily in my life. Um, and not to say that I'm, again, 100% and, holier than anyone, but the covenants of Levi and of the Nazariteship are very near and dear to me, and I try to live by them and act them out in the world. But I think if I had to choose, it's the Nazariteship because I took it on as opposed to being born into it by tribal affiliation. So Jesus says those who don't want to lead are usually the best choice for the job. As to going through the Torah, whatever you think would be relevant, but that may be all of it. I see. Okay. Well, what's relevant is the weekly Torah portion is always relevant, and then it's just a question of whether or not I can actually do it and say things that I would want to say. I'm not sure. I've always loved, and I always do, speak of the weekly Torah portion. I mean, I do it throughout the week with my kids at the dining table. Um, Occasionally, I'll do it during the week, when I'm commuting on the bus, or I don't know what. Though in many recent months, I've been more with music on the bus, not as much opening my Tanakh. Thank you, says Angela. Stay safe there. Thank you. I will try to do that. Robert says, what was the message of Levi? his pure message prior to rabbinites? Well, the message of Levi, as I see it, is to be the kind of person who will be able to guide others and to serve, right? The tribe of Levi is supposed to serve God and and on the flip side, serve Israel. The people of Levi are supposed to receive their Levitical benefits, right? The priests and the Levites receive certain benefits uh, in exchange for their work at the tabernacle and the temple. Different pieces of meat and skin or grains or whatnot, first fruit, that or whatnot, that thing. So the message of Levi, the message of Levi, as I see it, is of the right pillar, of this kind of righteous insistence and a righteous, and not in a bad way, because there is a bad facet to it potentially, but I mean it in a good way. Um, the covenant of Levi is to be steadfast and to help to guide others and to help. Let's say there's a reason why the people of Levi and the priests, right, the priests and Levites, there's a reason why they were dwellers of the cities of refuge, because there was something there where they were serving the people, to be of service to others and to be of service to the Most High. That's the message of Levi as I see it. Now, there's also the message particularly of the different things that they did, such as music, such as guarding the gates of the temple, such as carrying the Ark of the Covenant and the other artifacts, right? To carry that burden, to know your place. You're not the one who covers it. You're not the one who unveils it. You're the one who carries. If you don't do the job, a Levi that does a Kohen's work, that's no good. It's not kosher at all. I'm pretty sure he needs to be put to death by the Sanhedrin. It's knowing your place and being precise and surgical in your service to God, and also being open and expanding the heart when it comes to service of others, of the children of Israel. So, carrying the Torah, Moses, it's said, gave the Torah to the sons of Levi. He also gave, according to Midrash, the Torah to all the other tribes. But first and foremost, it was the tribe of Levi. The staff of Aaron, representing the tribe of Levi, was in the holiest of holies, along with the jar of manna, along with the Ark of the Covenant. That's no small thing. But I always remind myself that this crown of priesthood or of Levitical covenant and all these, carrying the ark and having the honor, let's say, of being separate from the children of Israel, who are already separate from everyone else. That's something that we need to live up to and earn all the time. So I don't mean to be boastful or full of pride or arrogance, but I certainly think that that there's a lot there, a lot to learn, whether it's from conceptual Levitical teachings and lore, or actual physical work, guarding, of being the conveyors of music and merriment, and thanksgiving, carrying artifacts, of assisting the Kohanim. That was the message as I see it. I guess I rambled right now. It's all a mishmash. Oregon Freebird said, my favorite podcasts are HN, of course. I appreciate that. Lex Feldman, yes, I like him. And United Israel World Union. Right, you mentioned that UIWU yesterday. I still didn't check them out. What kind of a channel is it? Well, maybe I'll check them out later. Haha, such a wholesome man. I think that's enough from me. Plus, I think it's about time that you want to log off. P.S. Perhaps just a crash course in all the tree of life. So there are two trees that are one. The tree of life is in Genesis a tree which bestowed upon the eater of its fruit, right, to live forever. Something like that. That's how we can perceive it here, as living forever. There's the tree of life, which means divine revelation coming through the 10 sfirot, the different 10 divine emanations, the way that God reveals himself in the world. 7 lower sfirot corresponding with the 7 chakras, 3 higher sfirot, if I'm not mistaken. And this also corresponds with other types of lore and teachings. 10, 7, and 3. The tree of life is Eden. The tree of life, because we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then then the path to the tree of life was put under guard, but it was not forbidden. So when I say the tree of life, I mean acting out, connecting to the way God reveals himself in the world, finding the 10 sfirot that are within me, trying to align myself in my actions to the 10 sfirot, and in doing so, mirroring the very revelation of God in creation. Like I'm trying to do it on a small scale. And when I align myself with that revelation of God and I send it out, and there's a meeting point where God is revealed through the 10 sfirot, and I'm trying to embody the 10 sfirot. And there's a meeting place there with Torah and commandments acting as kind of mediators, if you will. That midpoint is the tree of life, which is why the Torah is also likened to the tree of life. It says in the book of Proverbs, "Etz chayim hi lamachazikim ba." It is a tree of life to those who grab hold of it, grasp it. And so through living tree of life in the Torah and the commandments and trying to embody the tree of life in our everyday actions, we then develop ourselves in such a way that we will merit to have revealed to us as individuals or a unified human race the path to the tree of life. At that point, we will be able to go back to Eden and finish the job we started, because we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil right before the 7th day came into being. And so on the 6th day, towards sunset, but not yet, towards sunset, we sinned, we missed the mark. And that time between the twilight or pre-twilight, that short time of between the sunset into the Sabbath, because the Hebrew day starts at night, sunset. That time of Eden, right? 6 days of creation. Again, not 24 hours as far as I see it, but periods of time. 6 days of creation, and on the close to the eve of the 6th day, close to the end of it, that's where we sin. And so we never experienced the Edenic Sabbath. That first primordial Shabbos is something we never experienced, because in that short span of time between when we sinned and sunset, that time turned into human history as we know it. Maybe even the universe as we know it. So that whole time that we consider history and creation as we know it, we are still in between that time, between almost the end of the 6th day and the coming of the Sabbath. The coming of that Edenic primordial Genesis Sabbath. That is what the tree of life represents. That is what the Torah represents. And that is where we are going. And that's why the Sabbath is called a taste of the world to come. The world which is coming towards us, and the world which we will come to when we partake of the tree of life. That's what I mean. And so when I say I'm a student of the tree of life, it means I'm trying to conduct myself in such a way and attach myself to certain teachings and ways of being in the world which facilitate finding that path to the tree of life. Meaning that if and when we as a people show up on the edge of that path, the messengers who are there, the keruvim, the cherubs, and the heat of the flaming sword, of the rotating sword, they will not be hindrances and guards. They will open up to us because we merit it, and they will be guides. Those who are meant to be guards will become our guides if we merit it. And that, to me, is what Kabbalah is about. We expand ourselves in order to receive more, to channel more, to raise it back up into creation and meet that divine revelation that's coming towards us, working towards the same thing. We are the image of God. We are the small scale creators. That's what I mean when I say tree of life. And that's what I kind of mean when I say that I'm a student of the tree of life. That's a crash course. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's how I see it. Also, I said two trees that are one. It's not just that it's the tree of life conceptually, ten sfirot, and the tree of life in conceptually in Eden that we are meant to get to. There is the teaching that says that in Eden they were both the very same tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Had we not eaten from its fruit, would have changed at sunset in the coming of the Sabbath that we missed, that we are going towards. During the time of transition, the tree would have transitioned from knowledge of good and evil, duality, dichotomy, this world, evil, to a world where there is life. And evil is not a part of it. The Sabbath, life, going with that original sort of thing. Let's see. P.S. number 2 says Jesus, or a stream on the metaphysical concepts such as kfitzat haderech or reincarnation. That's a good idea, not because I know a lot about it, but because A, it would be an excuse to gain more knowledge, and B, I do actually think I've spoken of kfitzat haderech and of reincarnation in the past. At the very least, they've come up and I've gone into them a little bit, not in depth, because I don't have the depth, I think, quite yet, but I do think they came up here and there. I don't know if those videos where I mentioned them survived, but I certainly have not dedicated recently a video to Kfitzat Haderech or reincarnation and to the uninitiated or those who don't speak Hebrew. Kfitzat Haderech means the the jumping of the path. In other words, it's almost like teleportation, but instead of you teleporting somewhere else, you stay kind of where you are, walking along, and the path teleports itself to you. There's a difference there, but something like that. Robert Harrison says, also it says, which I didn't know, Moses put the book of Deuteronomy in the ark. The scroll, he wrote a Sefer Torah. The scroll, was it? I don't think it was there. I think it was beside it. I don't think it was inside, because when Solomon puts the ark in the holiest of holies in the temple, the Tanakh is very careful to specify that there is nothing in the ark but the tablets. There is a debate in the sages on whether or not it's the second tablets and the original tablets and the remnants, right? The pieces of the original tablets are there as well, or if it's only the second whole tablets, right? The second pair, which Moses crafted. So let's see. Robert Harrison, says Oregon Freebird, he wrote a Sefer Torah, the Book of Moses, and put it in the Ark of the Testimony. I don't think it was the complete Deuteronomy as we have it today. Maybe, maybe not. Far be it from me to know, but what he wrote, she says, is within the book. He also wrote a Sefer Bil'am. I would love to see what is in that someday. Who knows? Maybe they will be found. Maybe. I still think there's a lot more ancient and lost lore that is going to be presenting itself to us. Maybe it's wishful thinking, and maybe it's not the right time. Maybe the time for that lore is dead and gone, and now it's time for something else. That's also a very, very distinct possibility. Robert Harrison says, I know to Karen, I know today in my read in Deuteronomy 31 and chapter 32, it says Moses took the book of this law and put it into the ark. Hang on. Vayasem oto mitzad. Give me a second here. I'm trying to find. Yes, lשים אותו מצד ארון ברית Adonai. Here's the thing. It says put it on the side, and it's not precisely. There are people, because of the different translations of the Hebrew, they aren't sure if it's on the side, on the external side, or the side of the Ark of the Covenant on the inside. So traditionally, it's on the it's the external side of the Ark of the Covenant, but there are those who say that it was inside, indeed. So let's see. There were two arks, right? One which Bezalel crafted and one which Moses crafted. The Bezalel one was the one which had the two stone tablets, and it was golden, and it had the cherubs, and the ark which Moses constructed, was of plain wood, if I'm not mistaken. And that is the ark. The Moses ark was the one that would be carried into battle. It's the one that was taken at the times of Eli and Shmuel. Oh man, what a trip. But thanks for the response, says Robert. Or again, he says to Robert, is that written or oral? He also says something of Aaron is in the ark to his something. What do you mean? Something of Aaron. Well, yeah, the staff of Aaron, the rod of Levi is also there. Again, some people say that it's outside. Traditionally, in the Hebrew faith, it's outside. And the only thing inside are the tablets. And according to others, no, it's inside. So you have the tablets inside, you have a scroll inside, and you have a rod inside. I don't know what other people say about the jar of manna. Maybe other people say that the jar of manna was also inside. Um, Now, all of these things that were added to the holiest of holies, the fact that one of them is sustenance, the fact that one of them is something that helps you walk, it's all to do with how do you conduct yourself in the world? How is it that you're walking? What is it that's sustaining you? Hmm? It's all so. I mean, you could say that no, it's all a bunch of crap, Jonathan, and you're simply reaching and making connections where there ought not be. Maybe, but it means a great deal to me when I see the order and the chaos of what it means to be a Hebrew man as I see it, and the Torah as I perceive it, and the way that it brings together the feminine and masculine and merges them together to birth something new in this world, in this life. I see it as I see it as a great thing, or it has the potential of being great if we can channel it properly. Oregon Freebird said, it is written, Ark of the Covenant and Ark of the Testimony. Yes, Arona Brit ve'Arona Edut. That's right. Jesus says, yes, you've mentioned it before some time ago. Speaking of those things, there's a play of words in Dune that led me to Kfitzat. I don't know. I haven't read it. Still haven't read it. I also haven't started reading the Brothers Karamazov. It's too. I need to just make an effort to read at least 10 or 15 minutes every day. I'm reading. I'm definitely reading, but I'm reading a lot, thank God. But I'm putting off the Brothers Karamazov for a time when I can really commit myself every day to 10 or 20 minutes of reading, because otherwise I only read, let's say, secular books on the Sabbath sometimes or on Friday night, and not every day. And with a book like the Brothers Karamazov, right, Dostoevsky's work, it's so many characters and so many things going on, and I would lose my spot. And I said this before, and I'd lose my, not physically, but I'd lose my place in it. So I need to do it every day. I do. So and maybe I'll read Dune. I would love to delve deeper into it. Makes me curious what other metaphysical ideas there are. Oh boy, there are tons of metaphysical ideas in Midrash and in Talmud, in the Mishnah, in the Torah itself, let alone things like Kabbalah and so yeah, there's a ton. Sounds like our hearts. Ruger 12. What do you mean by sounds like our hearts? Because I don't exactly know when that came in and what I was saying at the time. Could you clarify what that what it's in reference to? I could read a lot more. Jesus says. I just watched the movie, to be honest. That's okay. That's cool too. The arcs are like our hearts. Yes, very much like a heart. Um, yeah. Uh, you know what though? I mean, I understand how I view it as the arc and the heart. How do you view it? What is the correspondence? What is the dialogue between the arc and our hearts? I'd love to know, Ruger 12, if you're into explaining a little bit on what you mean by that. And anyone else, do you see the Ark of the Covenant or of the Testimony corresponding with different organs or systems of physiology? Because that could definitely be something we can get into. Wow, it's been an hour and a half. You know what? I'm just gonna right now, because I think I might log off soon. Ruger 12 said, like he will write the word on our heart. Ah, I see what you mean. That the Torah is written on tablets of stone, and the Torah is written on our hearts. And much like the stone, were tablets, much like the stone tablets were ones that were unbroken, and there were ones that were broken, we need to not harden our hearts, right? But be able to have the word of God be inscribed on it. I hear what you're saying. I like that. I don't really have the capacity to understand the ark. And it's our storehouse, says Ruger 12. Ah, yes, okay, I see. Like you put things to the side of it, in it. I see what you mean. Yeah, that's right. The heart can be a very, very interesting guide, but again, you need to be grounded because the heart can be tampered with, manipulated, broken. Um, the heart can be something that which brings pride and arrogance. So, right, the heart has all those different chambers, again, also corresponding to different divine revelations there. Certain organs bringing in the blood and certain ones carrying it out, right? The aorta, that whole thing. There's the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, and something else I can't recall. Well, there's the Ark of the Testimony, Noah's Ark, but that's a teva and not an aron. The word teva and the word aron, which is like an ark as in Noah's Ark, an ark as in Ark of the Covenant, those are two different root. They correspond with different roots of Hebrew and of the Hebrew letters. So there's that. But they are both things which, let's say, constrain, right? The people were inside of the ark, the tablets were inside of the ark. It's something which carries you through the flood, carries you through the storm, teaches you how to live, how to behave, safeguards you, that whole thing. So, what do you mean? What do you mean by something else you can't recall? May the blessings of Deuteronomy 28 be upon you and upon us all, the blessings that Moses gave Israel. And they seem to be two different things. Yes, they are two different things, two different, let's say, right, like I said now, two different things. When the heart, says Ruger 12, when the heart condemns, he is greater than our heart. I would love to be able to read Hebrew. You're blessed, man. Thanks for sharing. That's very, very cool. I'd love to get more and more and more into Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic, or the three sister languages. It probably has a deeper meaning in Hebrew, yeah, for sure. Definitely. The thing with Aramaic that to me is special, other than the fact that, the Babylonian Talmud and the Zohar are written in different types of Aramaic, Babylonian Aramaic and Eretz Yisrael Syrian Aramaic, which I connect with a lot more, understand a lot more of. The idea of part of the idea of Aramaic, let's say spiritually, metaphysically, is that angels and divine messengers that are not human, angels do not speak it. Angels don't understand Aramaic. And so all of the different times where there are Aramaic prayers and not Hebrew ones in the, let's say, the Siddur, the Orthodox, or, well, because that's the only one I know, right? The Orthodox prayer books, every time there's Aramaic, it's a kind of transition or the potential of transition where there's a kind of a direct link because we are speaking a tongue that is foreign to the angels. It has the potential, if we, like an arrow being fired, if we send it fast enough, high enough, with good intent, if we don't sin, if we don't miss the mark, then, right, and we have the right kavana, if we have the right intention and intent and all that, in mind, and right down to sometimes, like with Kabbalists, how they position themselves and what they say and breathing in and out and all that, then you can go around or right through, rather. You can go right through the different angelic revelations, gatekeepers, and conveyors of prayer, and just go straight up into right before the throne of God, as it were. Now, the name throne of God and the name, the Kiseh HaKavod, the seat of glory, as it's known, those are all different divine revelations in and of themselves. right? A seat, something you sit on, your legs touching the ground. That's there's a lot there, and I'm not going to unpack everything right now. But yes, the idea with Aramaic is very, very deep, and that's why certain prayers are still in Aramaic, and they remain that way. There are three arks, as Jesus mentioned in the Bible: Noah's Ark, Moses' Ark, and the Ark of the Covenant. It's just what I found. Yeah, that's right. Those are the three. Oregon Freebird said, I'm starting lessons in October, Hebrew lessons. Wow, look at that. I hope I pick it up quick. Might be watching some Israeli TV. What do you recommend? I love Sulgim. SP. I'm not sure what SP is, but Sulgim I watched, I think, only the pilot in film school, and I enjoyed it. As for Israeli TV, I have no recommendations, but I do know that there's like the Israeli news and goings on and different, and probably a channel that's meant for olim, that's meant for those who are learning Hebrew, and so the speech is more in tune, right, and corresponds to different levels of learning Hebrew, or a simpler and plainer Hebrew. Let's leave it at that. Wow, starting to learn Hebrew. You and Jared yesterday, right? Christian Homestead and Robert and others. What a I completely, by the way, I completely understand the idea of those who are drawn to Torah and who don't know Hebrew. I completely understand why they would be hella interested in learning it, if only to be able to understand the Torah in its original tongue. And while we may not go back all the way to Paleo Hebrew, some people do, some people don't, the square letters and the Torah as it's written in the scroll, that has great significance. Not to mention it's a sacred tongue, according to tradition. Wow, says Ruger. Yes, indeed. Wow, to starting to learn Hebrew. I'm assuming that's what you're reacting to. Robert says, I am learning Hebrew, listening to Shiloh ben Hod music, Gadol Adonai, also Hey Pinky. Well, Robert, you arrived after I started. In the first minute, I said I'm actually babysitting for a toddler, friends of mine who have an anniversary on this day, the 15th of Av, and I was at their wedding 9 years ago. So they called me and wanted to know if I could babysit. So I am, and he's asleep. Oh hell, says Jesus, I just remembered one of those thoughts. Have you heard of these names? Yekon, Ashbil, Gadril, Kasdaye, and Penemue. Well, Yekon reminds me of Yachin. Yachin was one of the pillars which Solomon built for the temple. Ashbil is one of the sons of Benjamin, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on. Yemuel veYamin veOhad veYachin veTzochar. No, that's Shimon. Maybe Mupim veChupim veArad veRosh. So I know Ashbil is one of Benjamin's kids. Gadril, I don't know. Kasdaye, I don't know. And Penemue, I don't know. It's from one of those books of Hanoch where it talks about these five Satans. Ah, okay. Well, if you're talking about five adversaries, then those names are probably written in Hebrew. Written in Hebrew. Oh, spelling. Gotcha. Sugim, yeah, that's how it's spelled. If you're talking about five adversaries, they they probably have names in Hebrew which I might recognize, but in English I certainly didn't recognize them. Also, in the part of the Pardes Monim where Rabbi Moshe Cordovero speaks of the halls of impurity and of where the halls and the dwelling places of the adversaries, then there are many, many, many names. You're not supposed to utter them, but for those who do study this lore, and certainly for those who practice Kabbalah, it's imperative that you know the names of the masters of the halls and chambers that you are interested in ascending to or working within, something like that. So those five Satans, those five adversaries, I know them not, but it doesn't mean that I don't that I've never read them. There's a chance that I have read of them, but I simply don't remember. Pardes Limonim is such an amazing book. Wow. Okay, let's see. I think they are five leading an army of 200 fallen malach. Well, traditionally, it's 400 sects of impurity. This idea of 400 comes from traditionally 400 years in Egypt. That's also where Bob Marley and the Wailers got the song 400 Years. And speaking of that enslavement, 400 is also the number of people who went alongside Esau when he was on his way to meet Jacob at the time of their reunification. Jacob sends messengers and cattle and gifts to Esau, and the right, and the messengers return before they set out with the cattle. They return to the messengers return to Jacob, and they said, Esav, your brother, is coming towards you, right? Is walking to you with 400 men, if I'm not mistaken. It's them or later, messengers that came later. This idea of Esau, the adversary of Jacob, walking with 400 men at his side or in back, that's manifested through 400 sects or groups of impurity, right? Of impure messengers, of impure divine revelations. And those are also signified in the world of the angels, right? The angelic world as Satan's adversaries and keepers of halls of impurity, of what's called the klipot. So the book of Hanoch is one that I'm not versed in, and I've only read pieces from, so I don't know it too well. But if you're talking about those names, like I said, I don't know them offhand, but there are people, not people, I'm sorry, there was a person leading an army of 400 fallen, let's say, people with him, an army coming towards Jacob, and there are the 400 sects and groups, right, of impurity and the angels that are there, the messengers that are there. But maybe you spoke of five leading 200, because that also has significance, in the book of Hanoch, I'm sure. If it's not 400, it's 200. So let's see. Oregon Freebird said, I listen to the shows because when I start learning pronunciation, I want it to sound native, not American. I see what you mean. So you listen to the shows, to Slugim. I hear ya. Well, I see. So you're founded on a blog called Restoring Nazarene Judaism. But do they mean followers of Yeshua, or do they mean Nazarite Judaism? Because there is no such thing as Nazarite Judaism. There's simply the Nazarite vow. But so I'm not exactly sure what it is that they are setting out to restore. So I don't know. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye. This has been so much fun. I thank you for your kind attention. I thank you for your time. You could be doing anything else right now, but you're doing this. You're chilling with me on this wonderful 15th of Av, and I deeply appreciate it that you're here, enlightening me, educating me, conversing with me, having a dialogue. And there is so much more to do, but right now I'm going to say goodbye. I hope you join me again. Thank you to all the new subscribers. I appreciate, every view, every sub, every comment, every question, everything. It really is a great blessing that I get to do this, and I consider it such an honor to be able to have this with you. Until then, let's have a wonderful night, a wonderful day. God bless. Happy 15th of Av. May we come together.